class. I can't, we were sieving sand for beads, looking for beads and little bones. And I said to him, I need to tell you, I said that when I come from Dr. Parker, when we dig, we find urns and statues. Not beads and bones. So I said, I'm going home, I can't take this anymore. So he said to me, where are you from? I said, from Greece. Go home, he said, you don't need to be here. So that was my first interaction with the weather in Imperial Valley. And it was quite something. So that year in 1970, we had to take preliminary courses, and we had to be approved by Mrs. Koski. Mrs. Koski was a very formidable lady, you saw from the picture. She was, I tell you, she was a giant, but she was a wonderful person. And she got the program off the ground, but my goodness, she really was something to see. And, yeah, Tina was very kind. So I had to take classes like English 1A, but nobody told me about Dr. Spear. And I had to take Dr. Spear because nobody else wanted to take classes with Dr. Spear. But I tell you, every Monday I had to meet with him in his office to go over my essay. But I tell you, and even though I had my husband who was a teacher and his friends who were teachers went over my essay and correcting everything, he would find mistakes. That guy was something else. But in the end, I learned how to write a scholastic paper, and I enjoyed his saying. And at the end of each essay, he would say to me, and he used to have this red pen, you know, and write, not bad for a Greek. Not bad for a Greek, but I did get an A from him, and he remembered me. He was one of my patients, by the way, years later at the hospital. So I'm glad that he was very kind to me. By the way, I don't want this to be a monologue. If any of you have any ideas, any suggestions, any corrections, please butt in. This is for everybody. Then in 1971, we started, we were accepted in the nursing program. Tina, did you read all the names of the class? No. Can I read them? Yes. Okay. These are the 29 people. As I said, Tom Neal was one of us, but then he dropped out and graduated the following year. Manuel Soto, Raul Soto, Evaristo Aguilar, Tom Neal, Margie Kay, Tina Pentley Aguirre, Denise Thornberg, Jerry Bonesteel, Judy Donovan, Jean Schneewinstraub, Dia Bodaga, Mary Harris, Melba Simmons, Gloria Walker, Doreen Dibu, Yvonne Boyer, Mary Lawrence, Barbara Doss, Margaret Shipman, Margaret Pierce, Willa Diggs, Colleen Mars, Cheryl Alexander, Susan Sowers, Sylvia Cisneros, Diane Dinard, Irene Ojeda, Mary Ann Stallman, Barbara Smith, and Kay Schuster, now Bambi. With very teenagers, there were some very young girls. I think that this was one of them, 19 to 50s. That was the age of the group. And when we started in 71. And of course, we had to meet for the first time in September and of 1971. And the first class we had, you all remember, Mrs. Koski, Fundamentals of Nursing. That was our first class that she taught. We were pioneers, the class of 73. as Tina said, we didn't know what we were doing. We were taking classes, of course, but there was no precedent to compare. We were the pioneers. For instance, I have some notes here about, and not only for us the students, but for several of our instructors. For instance, do you all remember Mr. Penley? Is he here? I want to put my glasses on. Wasn't that the first time you taught microbiology to us?
Yes.
Yes. And did you also teach anatomy physiology? There you are. So he was a pioneer too. That was the first time for you and the first time for us. Of course, we were students. We couldn't compare what he was teaching, right? We didn't know whether he was right or wrong. I remember, I know that Tom was with us in the microbiology class, and of course he was making wine. And I think that his was the best project of all. Yeah, mine was the serration mercenses. I don't know if Mr. Penley remembers, but my project was to take the serratia that was rusty and change the color, but leave all the quality. So somebody told me that it was used as an unknown for other classes. I hope that wasn't true. But the organism had all the characteristics except the color. I used ultraviolet light to change the color, and it changed for a couple of generations. That was, I'm so glad to see you. I often think of you. I don't know why, but with fond memory. But anyway, time was going on, and we got through the microbiology, anatomy, physiology, and now we were in our second year, beginning of the first semester of the second year. And I think at that time, my classmates, please correct me if I'm wrong, we were all getting very nervous at that time. The boards were a year away coming up. Everybody was saying, we're not learning anything, we're not going to pass the boards. And that's when Tina said that there was complaints to the State Board of Nursing, and an inquiry was made. Every one of us on a personal level had these fears, because again, there wasn't another class that had taken the board, so we had some statistics to compare ourselves with. We were the first class. I was so nervous, I decided to go and get a job at the Central Regional Medical Center to learn to see if I knew enough to be a nurse and to pass the boards. Well, I went to, when I went to the hospital, it was in 1971 in November, just before Thanksgiving. And I was Mrs. Irene Tober, and was a fantastic education director at the Central. And one of my mentors, by the way, and I am so grateful for her because she taught me so much. And she was acting director because the director, Mrs. Vance, was ill. She hired me on the spot, and Saturday morning, I went to work without any orientation as a nurse's aide on the South Wing. On the South Wing, they gave me room 15, and the patient in 15, the 2, was a very nice lady. I gave her a bath. I was a nurse's aide. I gave her a bath, changed the bed, ambulated the patient, did all the right things. So she asked me, says, I think we were talking, so I told her I was an art student and I was graduating the following year. And she said to me, when you graduate, come and see me, I have a job for you. it turned out that they gave me the director of nurses as my first patient on my first day at the Central Regional Medical Center. I tell you the things they've done to me. I worked. I worked there until I used to work weekends, Friday, Saturday nights in the intensive care as an SSA, but I really like cardiology and critical care, and I was sure that that's the path I wanted to go. Again, this is my story, and all the other 29 have their own story and the path that they follow. So there comes the time now that we're going to take our board exams. We're coming, and I can tell you, my memory is so fuzzy here because I was so nervous. But we piled ourselves in cars, and in those days, there was no computers like now that you take your exams on computers. You had to go to Long Beach for us and stay in the Long Beach Arena. And we had to stay in a hotel for 2 nights and to take 2 days of written exams with proctors and people watching over you, and you couldn't go to the bathroom by yourself, and you have to have someone come with you, and you couldn't have any books with you, and we were all having diarrhea and vomiting all the way to the board exams. Finally, and then when we came back, there was no RNIP like there is now. In those days, you were either an RN or an SSA. There was nothing in between. So the hospitals didn't know what to do with us. So they sat us in orientation for 3 months, waiting for the results of the board. There were no computers to have computerized results. They had to wait until September. So at my hospital, the director of nurses, Mrs. Jordan, she called the board in September. She had enough by that time. She was cutting off 18 of us, I believe, and she couldn't put us on the floor as RNs. And as Tina said, there were no nurses. They were just, we're lucky to have the RN as the supervisor on the night shift. That's what it was like when I was working. And she was told that we all passed, the ones from El Centro. So she called me in her office, and she congratulated me, and she said, now you are a registered nurse, and by the way, you are going to be charge nurse in ICU tonight. I never in my life worked as a staff nurse, because there were no staff nurses. We were the first class, so we were in charge, but I must tell you that I am very grateful to the wonderful LPNs that ran the floors. Those LPNs were fantastic. And I learned a lot from them, and they took me under their wing because I was a nurse's aide, and the next day I'm their charge nurse. So I was on dangerous ground there. But they were very nice, and I am so grateful because they were so good, and I learned so much, and I was very timid, and the patient told me, I don't want the shot, I said, okay, and then when Mrs. Kruger, one of the LVNs, turned to me and said, come here with me, she says, I'll show you how to do it. And it was a veteran from Vietnam who was a little bit difficult. So she goes into the room and she says, I've got a shot for you. He said, no, I don't want a shot. She says, run over. With that voice of hers like that, and the poor guy turned over. So I learned that there are times that I have to be assertive, so I learned to be assertive from that. So I knew that, as Tina said, we were at the right time when medicine was really changing. For instance, in my case, we began having monitors. on what would tell you with those Hewlett-Packard monitors, and I was her guinea pig when she was picking monitors for the intensive care. Remember that one? Yeah. And but then I had taken classes at UCSD because for a coronary care course certification. That was a precursor of the CCRN. Then I took we were doing intracranial pressure monitoring. I went to UCLA for training on that. I took a cardiology, an instructor course in CPR at Sharps by the American Heart Association. And so I taught community CPR for over 20 years at El Centro. So we were at the time that changes were taking place. So we were the pioneers. But the other thing I want to say that if it wasn't for those great nurses, and like, I don't know if some of you remember Mrs. Hughes, Mrs. Colbert, they were the nurses who taught the first critical care courses down in the valley. If it wasn't for those great women and that were our mentors, we couldn't possibly have become the nurses, the good nurses and the good leaders we have become. And we must never forget those mentors of ours, and we shall be internally grateful to them, because without their assistance we couldn't have become what we have become now. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. Those are some very interesting memories that we all do share when we go way back. There weren't RNs in this valley, very, very few. And so when our class graduated, it did make some changes. And